Adam, it's go time. Tar Heels, Florida State, 75-68. That is a final score I definitely remember, Adam. Tar Heels win it by 7 over the Seminoles. And this was a very physical game, a very up and down game, at times kind of a messy game, particularly in the first half. Very athletic game. Just both teams had guys flying around, it felt like. And Carolina led early, 19-8, on, I believe it was 4 consecutive three-pointers, 2 by R.J. Davis and 2 by Harrison Ingram. That aided the Heels to that big lead early. Then I'll say the last 10 minutes or so of the first half, Carolina did not play very well, and Florida State did some good things. The Tar Heels had all kinds of turnover problems in the first half. They turned it over 12 times in the half. They averaged 10.5 per game. Florida State had, was it 17 or 19 points, one of the two, I can't remember, points off turnovers at halftime of this game. And the Seminoles made more three-pointers in the first half, 7, than they average in a game. They average about 6, a little more than 6. And so Carolina, after all of that, found itself down, but just by 5 at halftime. And in looking back, considering that they had that many turnovers and that Florida State had that many three-pointers and the Heels were only down 5, was probably a good sign for the Tar Heels, assuming that they started playing better, which they did. The first, I'll say, 12 to 15 minutes of the second half, Adam, I thought Carolina looked really good. Their defense was much better in the second half. They kind of spammed the high pick and roll with either Elliot Cadeau or R.J. Davis because Florida State never adjusted. They kept switching. Carolina would find the switch that they wanted. And by that, I mean the defensive switch, not like the light switch. The defensive switch that they wanted. And then allow one of those two guards to get downhill and get to the rim or pull up in the mid-range, and it worked. And that turned the game from Carolina being down 5-7 to then the Heels were up 7-9, kind of in that range. Then the last, I'll say, 5 to 8 minutes of the game got a little messier again for Carolina. The offense stagnated some. But, Adam, something that we have seen pretty consistently from the Tar Heels this year is they just found a way to make the plays that mattered most. And whether it was R.J. Davis hitting that like 12-footer when the Heels were up 2 with about 60 to 90 seconds left and he got into the lane and had a little push shot that crawled in, whether it was Harrison Ingram blocking a shot at the rim or getting a big rebound, which he had plenty of, 17 of them in the game. Whatever it was, the Tar Heels made the plays at the end. It wasn't always pretty, but added up to another road win against a Florida State team that, in my opinion, is a good team and they don't have anything else in the tank than what they threw at Carolina, particularly in the first 20 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, this game was one of the things that made you say at the outset of the season, well, I don't know if Carolina can play R.J. Davis and Elliot Cadeau together, because what happens when they play a team, for example, like Florida State, that has a whole bunch of height? How would they ever handle that? Well, it turns out that the answer is, offensively, Cadeau and Davis would just keep doing everything they've already been doing because they both made shots over near 7-footers. And defensively, Carolina's been good enough with team defense to figure out how to rotate and cover up some of those deficiencies and prevent teams from just exploiting that over and over the way the Tar Heels exploited Florida State over and over. So I think that's credit to the coaching staff and to this particular personnel. Also, Carolina can really score fast. I mean, the second half, it went from down 8 to up 8 in about like 4.5 minutes of clock time. That's pretty fast.
Yeah.
And Cormac Ryan hit a couple threes that were important that felt like sort of got things going. Cadeau was really, really, really good for maybe 25 or 30 minutes and then kind of looked like a freshman after that. But what a luxury that you don't have to have 40 minutes of really, really good for him. If he can push you to the point where you have the lead and then you just turn it over to the veterans and let R.J. Davis and Harrison Ingram do it, that's how you become a really good team, because you don't have to rely on one player for the entire time. You have other options.
R.J. Davis scored 60 points in the 2 games this past week, Wake Forest and Florida State. As of when Adam and I are talking, we haven't seen the ACC Player of the Week yet, but if it's not R.J. Davis, then I'm not sure who it would be. He was – and, Adam, this was an interesting one because, like Wake Forest, you left that game going like, whoa, R.J. Davis was incredible. This game, I don't necessarily feel like you left there going, man, that's a great performance by R.J. Davis. But then you look down there, and he was 9 of 18 from the field for 24 points. He made the biggest field goal of the game and also hit some free throws down the stretch to help seal it. So he's reached that point, and we said that there was some game recently where he had a great line, and we said something similar that is kind of expected now. But that, to me, just shows you where he is, that he can go 9 of 18 and put up 24 points and make some of the biggest plays of the game, and you don't leave there going, whoa, R.J. Davis. It was just like, yeah, of course, R.J. Davis.
And the degree of difficulty on some of those shots was absurd. I don't know how he saw the basket, much less put the ball in the basket. And then to have that stat line, but then also be willing to play hard enough, he created that offensive rebound with about 3 minutes left, just sticking his nose in on what looked like a loose ball that Florida State was probably going to get, and was just playing so hard that he refused to let them get it. I don't think Carolina actually scored on that possession, but the fact that he created the extra possession is the kind of play that we've seen from him all year.
Adam, and I did, and then Adam did, talked about Cadeau, 16 points, 6 assists. He drew 9 fouls in this game. Got to the free throw line, was 8 of 9, and that has not been a strength of his this season. Didn't wear the undershirt. Maybe that's why he shot free throws better, Adam.
That could be.
Yeah. Who knows?
We got to talk to him on the Tar Heel Sports Network after the game, and he did a solid job.
He credited Coach Marcus Page. Coach Marcus.
Well, and you were saying you had gone back and watched some of the game, and I watched some of it too. It was interesting how much those two were talking on the bench, the rare times that Cadeau was on the bench.
Well, and I will say this, and we had Marcus Page on the radio show a couple weeks ago, and he was great. We were seated near the Tar Heel bench for this one. And Adam, maybe I was just unaware of it, but I mean, Marcus Page talks to the players a bunch. Like, there was one even coming out of the huddle one time, 4 Tar Heels had gone and kind of huddled up, and Cormac Ryan hung back, and he and Marcus Page were having a long discussion and, like motioning with their hands. They were clearly talking about something that had happened on the court. What an asset Marcus Page has been for Carolina and to this staff. Just another great basketball mind that's a part of this staff now that has such deep Tar Heel roots.
And I think he's getting more comfortable as a coach and figuring out when he can give that input. I mean, part of the skill in being a coach is a lot of things, but you can't tell Elliot Cadeau all those things on the bench in the 2 minutes he's sitting next to you. So what's the 1 or 2 things that you really need him to know, and can you convey it in a way that he's able to implement when he plays? That's the difference between knowing your stuff and being a good coach. And I do think, based on what Elliot said, I do think that Marcus Page is a good coach, and we'll probably have more on this topic after the Georgia Tech game, I'm guessing. But let's don't talk about it now.
Okay. Just 2 individuals, Adam, and then we can, get any more big picture thoughts from you after that. Harrison Ingram just does things to help Carolina win. I mean, he just does. 13 points, 17 rebounds, 3 steals, a block. He hasn't been shooting great the last, I'll say, month or so, and yet he still has helped Carolina win games. And then this game, he did shoot better. He was 4 of 8 from the field, 3 of 4 from 3, made his only 2 free throw attempts. And he's still doing all the other stuff to help you win. And when Deontay Green's sitting there chirping at Armando Bacot, Harrison Ingram's the first one to come in there and back up his team. He's just a man crush on Harrison Ingram. He does so much to help Carolina win.
It's hard to imagine this year's team without him in any way, either intangibly or tangibly, because of all the things he's doing. I mean, he just gets all the rebounds. Like, the ball goes off the rim, and he just assumes he's going to get it.
7 offensive rebounds, 10 defensive rebounds, 17 total rebounds. In conference play, he is leading the ACC in conference games only. He is leading the ACC in rebounding. I think it's like 11.5 that he is averaging in conference games.
And I think that also shows how smart he is, because he's figured out, like, this is a way, 7 offensive rebounds against Florida State.
Yeah.
This is a way I can really contribute, that my team needs me to do this. And so he just went and did it. Didn't have to have like a big sit-down meeting where he was like, I wonder what I should do. Like, oh, I should go get more rebounds. I'll just get 17 against Florida State. That's not an easy team to rebound against, both height-wise and athleticism-wise. And the fact that he's able to do that while also doing all the other things. And, I mean, Hubert Davis talked about after the game with you about how Harrison Ingram and RJ Davis brought Carolina home. And it did feel like that in the final minutes. One of those two guys was going to make the plays the Tar Heels needed.
Adam, 10 points and 11 rebounds for Armando Bacot in the 2 games combined this past week, Wake Forest and Florida State. Now, let me see. He only took 4 shots against Florida State. He took 6 against Wake Forest. That's obviously 10 total field goal attempts. Do we think this is a little lull for Armando? Obviously those are not numbers that he traditionally puts up. Hubert Davis spoke at length after the Wake Forest game, and I think we did too, about him still doing things to help Carolina win games, which definitely happened in the game on Monday. But those are not Armando Bacot-like stat lines.
I thought it was interesting what Leonard Hamilton said about Armando Bacot, about how much energy Florida State had to put forth to defend him, to limit him to those numbers, and how that opened up so many things for everyone else. I think a lot of times we don't see it that way because we don't really know what Florida State's game plan was. But Leonard Hamilton basically told you, take away Bacot and make the other guys beat you. Well, they did. We've said now for a couple years that we suspected Carolina might be better if Armando Bacot was a secondary option. Well, now he is, and look, Carolina's better. But yet everyone's mad at Armando Bacot. I don't really understand that. Like, if that's the biggest problem you have, things are pretty good. He's also gotten better defensively.
There's no question about that.
He's an important part of how good the defense has been because you can't move him down there. You're probably not just going to back him down. He's blocked shots better, it feels like, this year than in the past.
Averaging 2 per game.
There's the numbers. So in some ways it feels like this year kind of he has been what you always hoped he might be, but because his numbers aren't gaudy, everybody's upset. Well, his numbers were gaudy because Harrison Ingram wasn't there.
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting that now he doesn't have to get 20 rebounds every game for Carolina to be good on the glass. Now, I mean, I'm going to guess that the Heels would like for him to have more than 4 field goal attempts and 5 points and 4 rebounds. And yet, I mean, ultimately they won the game, which is what matters. So, but Harrison Ingram has shown what can happen when you have another good rebounder as well. And that's not to say that Pete Nance or Brady Manick or the shortstop by Dawson Garcia or whoever else has played in that position over the last couple seasons didn't do a good job or wasn't a good rebounder, but I do think Ingram's the best of that group in rebounding and has made a difference with Carolina's success there and how Bacot has to perform for Carolina to be successful.
If Georgia Tech comes out and decides they want to single cover Armando Bacot in the post, Carolina is going to pound it into him, and he may have another double-double, and then everybody's going to go, oh, there he is.
Yeah.
A lot depends on what the other guys do.
Bai Ndongo is a young big man for Georgia Tech, good young player. What do you think about that, Adam?
I have nothing to add on that young fellow.
No, he's a good young player. So he may get the assignment on Bacot. We'll see how it all works out. Adam, anything else from Carolina, Florida State? Again, I think Florida State's good. The problem that Florida State has is that they're trying to make up for some missteps early in the season where they have some head-scratching losses. Like they lost I think it was Lipscomb. They lost to South Florida. SMU. I mean, now, look, SMU's a conference game, so we can understand that.
Anything can happen in the ACC.
Yes. But they lost some games that you would not expect them to lose, and now they're having to catch up a little bit. I think they're a good team. And, again, they were really good for that like 10 minutes in the first half in particular where they were reining in shots. They were playing good defense. I mean, they are good. And Carolina, I'm impressed that Carolina, I don't think had its A game and yet still took a big shot from a good team on the road and walks away with a 7-point win.
The fact that that's a quad 2 win and Carolina dropped in the net after winning is ludicrous. It's just completely ludicrous. And I know we only got to see each of these teams one time. But if you told me that for the national title, the Tar Heels could either play that version of Florida State or play the version of Oklahoma that we saw, I'd rather go play Oklahoma, who everybody thinks is the greatest team in the world because they're in the greatest conference in the world, the Big 12, where you can lose and move up 47 spots in the net. It just doesn't make it like. Does anyone ever watch the games? Did you not watch Florida State play?
The computer watches the games, Adam.
I don't think it does.
Well, interesting talk about I had an interesting net talk this weekend, Adam, which is really my favorite kind of talk to have. Where there is some discussion behind the scenes. We've talked about this previously about how does the Big 12 always end up with 87 teams that are so high in the net? Well, Adam, if you look at the Big 12 and their non-conference strength of schedule, how many teams are there? I think there's – this is always a challenge. I think there's 14 teams in the Big 12, 16, 14. Let's say 14.
Mid-teens.
Yeah, somewhere in the mid-teens. Let's just say 14 for this exercise. I think 12 of the 14 teams have a non-conference strength of schedule of 200 or worse. And there's some that are in the 300s. And remember, there's like 360-ish Division I basketball teams. So there is some thought process that the way the Big 12 is doing this is by playing terrible teams, but by beating them so badly that the net overlord likes it. The net overlord says, oh, you beat Coppin State by 35 points? Boop, you're going up in the net, sir. Oh, you played Kentucky and lost by 4? I'm sorry. That's a net negative. So that, to me, Adam, is a flaw in the almighty net of why then would you have any incentive to play anybody good until you get into the conference play? Because then if you're 14-1 or whatever the number would be, I guess that's too many. If you're 10-1 going into conference play and you've not beaten anybody, but you've beaten everybody you've played by 30 points and your offensive efficiency looks great on KenPom, then the net is going to love you. And then, as we've said since the net was invented, then it just feeds on itself when you're in conference play. There's nowhere to go once you get in conference play. You're kind of in this box of a net range that it's hard to move out of. So that's something that needs to get looked at if that is the case. And I do think, I personally do think that is the case. We know that those things do matter. Margin of victory does matter. Offensive efficiency, how that somehow determines who the best teams are, I don't know, but that does matter in the net formula. So that's got to get figured out.
Here's what you cannot do. You cannot play those bad teams and lose to them, is what happened to Florida State.
Right.
You can play Lipscomb, but you got to beat them by 25.
Yeah.
And if you somehow lose to them, your season is essentially over.
Yeah, I go back to Clemson last year. Clemson lost to Louisville, who was terrible last year. And that one game kept them out of the tournament. There was the whole discussion where they had played State, what was it, 3 times? At least twice. And they had beaten them every single time and beat them the last time they played by like 20 or more points. But State got in the tournament and Clemson didn't, even though their records and their resumes were very, very similar. But that one game kept them out.
I believe the ACC is 9-3 head-to-head against the Big 12.
That's correct. And they had the split with the SEC. And quite honestly, if Florida State hadn't blown a big lead against Georgia at the end, they would have won that SEC challenge, which nobody's getting any chocolate nut sundaes for it. But, yeah, I believe you're right, 9-3. We know Carolina beat Oklahoma head-to-head on a neutral site.
Why doesn't anyone ever bring that up? They bring up how strong the Big 12 is. Well, how come part of that discussion isn't they did go 3-9 against the ACC, which everyone tells me is terrible.
Yeah.
How can you be that good if you were 3-9 against the ACC?
Well, and some issue there, too, is now you have guys like national people who just are saying this.
Right.
John Rothstein, who I like and think does a great job. I don't know him at all, but I think he does a great job covering college athletics, and or college basketball. He clearly loves the sport, is good at it. And yet you have him out there publicly saying that the ACC might only get 2 bids because Clemson lost to Duke. What?
By 1 point.
By 1 point on a controversial call in Durham at the end of the game. And Clemson's net is like 28 or something. And you're saying that they might not get in because they lost this. That's crazy. I think your boy, Jeff Goodman, did I see somewhere that he called ACC a mid-major conference?
I believe that's right.
And so, but I don't know. Like, how do you turn that around? We all know Jeff Goodman's dumb, but but there are plenty of people who listen to that. And here's the other thing, and I do think this is the case, and we've heard this from people who matter. Lunardi's bracket makes a difference.
Right.
Because there are people on that committee who maybe aren't all in on their homework, but when they look at Joe Lunardi and they go, oh, okay, so he's only got 3 AC. Now, that doesn't mean they're following what he's doing, but it may mean that Miami or somebody who might be there on the edge, and they're like, well, okay, well, Lunardi's got them in the next 4 out, so they're probably not in. And you may think that we're exaggerating that. We're not exaggerating that.
Yeah, I don't know that it makes as much a difference between like a 3 seed and a 4 seed, but
right.
In and out, I absolutely think it matters. I would go for an ACC Mountain West challenge right now. Let's meet in Chicago and we'll play. And then everybody can just shut up because I'll tell you what's going to happen.
Yeah.
The ACC is going to kick their butt.
Yeah.
There's just no doubt about it.
And see, the problem is you got like the limited examples you have is like BYU beat State.
Right.
Well, breaking news, guys, State ain't the best we got to offer for you.
And it was a home game for BYU, and they had an ACC team coming that never comes. Of course. How did they do in the tournament last year? How do they do in the tournament every year? That no one seems to care about that because in the regular season, Nevada is formidable in KenPom metrics.
And obviously San Diego State had the run to the title game, but I believe every other team lost in the first round. And if not the first round, the first weekend.
Which echoed their performance the year before.
Right.
The ACC isn't I'm not trying to say the ACC is the best league in the country or even that it's as good as it was 10 years ago.
No, it's not.
But it doesn't deserve the reputation it's now currently receiving.
Also true.
And someone like a Jim Phillips needs to stand up and say, wait a second.
Well, and it needs to be, like, I know nobody wants to hurt anybody's feelings, but it needs to be like Jim Phillips goes over there and says, Jeff Goodman called our league a mid-major league. That's ridiculous. Let me explain why. It needs to be that pointed at this point, in my opinion. And, here's the other thing. Like, the course of a year, like Virginia, right? Virginia is much better now than it was a month ago or 3 weeks ago. Virginia Tech is much better now than it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think Clemson's really good. Did they make 4 consecutive turnovers and blow the game in Cameron with the aid of the officials? Yes, they did. But that doesn't mean that they're a bad team. So it is frustrating.
I got a question. Iowa or whoever, do you want to come play Virginia at Virginia?
Right.
Do you want to come play
God,
Duke?
could you imagine if you had to watch Iowa and Virginia? Oh, my God. That'd be terrible.
Do you want to go play Duke at Duke with ACC officials? Do you want to go to the Castle?
That's right. That's a hard place to play.
That is a hard place to play. Go play them on a Saturday afternoon when those people are fired up. The whole thing's just ridiculous. And the fact that, just to use this as an example, Jeff Goodman doesn't care about hurting anyone's feelings when he says the ACC is a mid-major league, but the ACC is supposed to say, thank you, sir, and just take it, is a bunch of malarkey. Like, we're talking about, this is money here.
Yeah.
You're costing the league money. Every unit is $1. And the ACC,
It's actually more than $1, but yes, it is dollars.
Trust me, the ACC needs the dollars.
And the units.
So stand up for yourself and stop taking it. And
And like the points of pride email is not enough. You got to go out there and do something. You got to go do something.
Running a 30-second spot during Boston College, Georgia Tech on the ACC network.
Check it. The CW.
Yeah, right before the promo for F-Boy Island isn't getting the national eyeballs that you need.
What is that I hear, Adam? A retroactive CR Legal Team? How can you justify that? Brought to you by CR Legal Team? CR Commitment, CR Results, CR Legal Team, proud partner of Carolina Athletics. Adam, anything else about the Heels and the Knowles?
No, I didn't even know I was that fired up about that, but now I am. Look, we can talk bad about all these schools,
yes.
but I don't want anybody else doing it.
Yeah. Look, we can say Virginia's terrible to watch, but you can't say that. We know that. We have to go watch it.
Did I see you from across the playground push Clemson?
Yeah.
I'm Harrison Ingram. Come on.
Yeah.
Let's do this, Deontay Green.
Look, I've always respected you, Ian Shefflin. I'm not going to let anybody push you around. Yes, we know that Boston College is a little rinky-dink, but guess what? There are rinky-dink.
Wait till next year when we're this fired up to protect Cal,
Yeah.
but I don't actually know anything about them.
Look, I'm only riding with one of those three schools, and I don't need to tell you who that is.